3/4 of all murders of transgenders takes place in Central and South America. In Colombia, prejudice and fear both force many into becoming a courtesan. So, will the end of the country's civil war finally bring acceptance? Hey guys, welcome back to The Crime Analyst. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on post notifications by hitting the bell so you never miss out on any of our uploads. And now, without further ado, let's begin with today's video. As Latin American countries grapple with overcrowding, worsening prison conditions, and the devastating impact of COVID-19 in prisons, a report identified an alarming absence of standards and public policies to protect an often ignored population, the trans women deprived of liberty. The report, the first ever regional study of its kind, underscores the critical need to release as many people in prison as possible before COVID-19 enters the region's crumbling prison infrastructure. Over the globe, transgender women have been subjected to criminalization, discrimination, and institutional violence. They often face violations of human rights, social exclusion, as well as transphobia. In many situations, this leads them to working in highly criminalized informal economies, such as the drug trade or prostitution for survival. Then the police identify them as being dangerous, as well as making them more vulnerable to police abuse and being incarcerated at times. While data is sorely lacking, our research signals that trans women are overrepresented in prison compared to others, and they are much more likely to suffer violence and abuse in prison than other populations. Additionally to the challenges that incarceration imposes on any person deprived of liberty, trans women face particular difficulties concerning housing, body searches, their identification, access to medical services, privacy, conjugal visits, and more. Despite this, trans women who have been deprived of liberty have demonstrated their capacity for agency and created organizations to defend their human rights. In countries such as Argentina, Uruguay, and Mexico, groups of transgender women are building a social movement based on various types of resistance and the development of political agendas. After Brazil, Colombia is probably the most dangerous country in the Americas for LGBT+ people. In 2020, attacks against LGBT+ trans people and leaders continued even amid the COVID-19 lockdown. Meanwhile, the absence of public policies to protect the rights of trans women deprived of liberty is a lot in Latin American countries. The lack of disaggregated data and related studies have deepened ignorance about these realities and hindered public policy design. Given the absence of information on this issue, this report explores the framework of rights, protection for trans women deprived of liberty, the statistical data available, structural inequalities existing before detention, living conditions in contexts of confinement, post-release social integration, trans women's experiences of agency, along with good practices in the region. Furthermore, the report provides public policy recommendations to guarantee the full exercise of this population's dignity and protection of its human rights. Also drawing on a participatory research process led by formerly incarcerated trans women, the study, Transgender Women Deprived of Liberty, The Invisible Stories Behind Bars, comes from a collaboration between 9 human rights and advocacy organizations. The report states the failures of Latin American governments to implement simple measures to protect trans women deprived of liberty from abuse. In conclusion, trans women are subjected to discrimination, stigmatization, and criminalization at every stage of interaction with the criminal justice system. Due to the vulnerabilities associated with gender identity, trans women in prisons are at heightened risk of experiencing inhumane and unsafe incarceration conditions. The governments across the world need to implement comprehensive policies to confirm the protection of incarcerated trans women and their basic rights. A report detailed the risks faced by trans women inside prison, dangers that are usually exacerbated by the lack of policies that address their special needs. Trans women are usually placed in men's prisons without their consent, violating their identity rights and increasing the risk of sexual violence. Across Colombia, transgender women usually lack adequate access to healthcare oriented towards their unique needs and educational opportunities. In addition, they report prolonged solitary confinement, invasive body searches, frequent prison transfers, as well as other forms of ill treatment. The report's findings also highlight the absence of statistical information about Latin America's LGBT+ population behind bars. Less countries in the region have produced disaggregated data to analyze broader trends concerning trans people deprived of liberty, leaving policymakers with few tools to design and implement specific policies for this group at higher risk. Little data signals the role of punitive drug policies in the incarceration of trans people in the region. In Argentina, for instance, 70% of trans people in prison were incarcerated for drug-related offenses in 2017. South America's macho culture, mixed with the strong influence of the Catholic Church, means it is a challenging place to be a trans woman. In the past decade, 74% of all reported murders of trans people were in South and Central America, according to a 2016 report from Transgender Europe. Due to poverty, violence, and the risk of HIV, and the life expectancy for trans women in Latin America is said to be between 35 and 41 years of age. And now Colombia is on the verge of change. The peace deal between the government and rebels has renewed hopes that its decades-long civil war might be over. There is hope that the country might be made safer for LGBT+ people who are regularly targeted in the violence. Trans people in particular hope that the visibility and acceptance trans issues are beginning to receive in the US might spread south. Colombia has recently experienced significant milestones in terms of political and other forms of representation for trans people, paving the way toward a more inclusive society. In 2019, Bogotá elected Claudia Lopez as their first woman president. Several elected representatives across national, departmental, and local levels like Andres Cancemonce of Putumayo and Oriana Zambrano identify as a member of the community. Television shows continue to feature more LGBT+ roles, and social media coverage of LGBT-related issues has grown more consistent. These increased levels of visibility result from tireless campaigns by civil society groups who work to educate and transform society. Many legal victories led by local civil society organizations and grassroots movements have led significant momentum to the fight for LGBT+ communities' equality in Colombia. In 2015, trans people over 18 were given the right to change their legal gender on all identification documents, and same-gender marriage was legalized. These decisions by the Constitutional Court and legislation enacted by the Colombian Congress are massive legal breakthroughs that place Colombia at the forefront of the LGBT+ movement. Moreover, even the historic 2016 peace agreement between the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and the government contains a differential focus on gender. Through a gender subcommittee that added an LGBT+ representative, the negotiating actors recognized that LGBT+ and women were disproportionately affected by the armed conflict, and 41 gender-specific provisions were included throughout the agreement. Adding this focus on women and LGBT+ groups helped make Colombia's 2016 peace deal one of the most inclusive peace agreements in history. Also, according to LGBT+ rights groups, though many of these provisions remain stalled, about 70% have at least begun implementation. One main mechanism in the peace agreement includes the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, one of 3 separate components which make up the current transitional justice system. And in the result of the work conducted by Colombia Diversa and Caribe Afirmativo, the most prominent LGBT+ organizations in the country, JEP opened 2 cases on the persecution of LGBT+ people during the armed conflict. Therefore, the JEP is the first transitional justice tribunal in the world to recognize that in the scope of the armed conflict, the LGBT+ people were targeted because of their sexual orientation and identity. The LGBT+ Colombians have numerous reasons to celebrate, but their battle for ensuring the enforcement of identity and sexual orientation protections still battles. Adding and enforcing the mechanisms designed in the peace agreement are also challenges that affect not only LGBT+ people, but also affect Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities who are silenced in similar ways. It is the work of civil society groups and activists that made the current feats possible, and this work is to be amplified. The international community should continue to hold authorities accountable for enforcing the laws set forth to protect the rights of the LGBT+ community. Ultimately, the support must account for the intersections among race, class, ethnicity, and disability that deepen the discrimination faced by the community in Colombia and more. Were you aware of this? Get involved and let us know in the comments section down below what you think about today's video. If you liked this video and found it informative, then be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. Also, if you do not want to miss out on any new future videos like these, then be sure to click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification under this video so that you're notified the next time we upload a new video.